and welcome to a new episode of the Awaken Together podcast. I'm Kat.
I'm Jen.
And in today's episode, we are turning to a heavier topic, and it's all about escapism, addiction, and numbing out. So we're going to have more of a conversation today and share our personal experiences on these heavy topics with you.
Yeah. So we're not only going to talk about substance addiction, which I feel like is the very recognized thing that falls under the umbrella of addiction, but also look at other forms of it, such as codependency, our cell phone addiction, social media addiction, the stuff that I think we're all experiencing a lot more collectively too, and dive into those topics. So, one of the first things I wanted to bring up is I held a very high standard for myself that I was not an addict. I don't know if anyone relates to this, but I was told growing up that there was a lot of addiction in my family and that I needed to be very careful on being near substances. It was kind of always this fear relationship. So I was so proud of myself for not ever being addicted to a substance, when underneath that, I had a lot of addictions to other things. So Kat, to start us off, you want to share some of your personal experience with addiction and escapism, and then I will gladly go into some of mine too.
Sure. So, to take it back to high school, if you have listened to some of our earlier episodes, you know that I lovingly called my high school days my dark cat days because I was a hot mess.
Yeah. You got it done nice and early.
That's right. I own it now, and I lovingly look back on that little girl with, I don't know, just like compassion. Basically, because growing up, being a teenager is really hard in society today.
Mhm.
So I started off, I think it was heading into freshman year, and I started drinking for the first time to really fit in. It seemed like the cool thing to do. And while I still wouldn't say that I ever had an addiction to it, I definitely abused it. I binge drank a lot. Like, I didn't know any other way but binge drinking. That was the
Mhm.
norm. Having one drink at a time, like I, responsibly do now as a 30-year-old, was a
Mhm.
foreign concept.
Yes.
And just like smoking weed in the school bathroom, like there were no boundaries when it came to escaping for me. And it was also in a sense of fitting in. But when it got a little far for me was when I remember like buying alcohol from someone and putting it in the water bottles to hide it from my
Mhm.
parents in my room and thinking to myself, wow, I have such a stockpile now. I could just have this whenever I want. And that's when I kind of recognized that that's probably not a healthy thought. That's probably toxic and addictive behavior.
Mhm.
And so I did stay away from that. But but yeah, that was kind of how I treated numbing out and escaping from my insecurities, my low confidence growing up. And now it manifests in different ways for me. So I'll touch on that in just a little bit, but
Yeah.
I want to hear for you, Jen, how that is.
Yeah, first to comment on your experience too. We were discussing this topic a little bit before we came on, and I do think that beneath a lot of our turning to substances and things like that is this uncomfortableness with ourselves. I think this year was the first year that I wasn't in as much of social settings because I took my year on the road. And what I was able to see, even beyond the healing that I've been doing even more these past 5 years, not having necessarily the pressure to show up one way. I really got to experience that in a bigger depth this year. And I've realized how much I've used that as a safety blanket. Like if I have a drink with me or I'm high and I do something a little bit out there, I can always have like this backup to blame it on. And I liked that you said the difference between kind of abuse and addiction, because I think that is like a slight difference. And yeah, you can abuse a substance and still not fall into that necessarily addiction full mindset, because addiction can definitely get to a point where you do need outside help, because substances can actually be physically addictive. And I luckily never fell into that physical addiction, but did I use it to, yeah, blend, fit in, have like a backup excuse in case I was too authentic, too silly, too messy. I could always go, oh, I was just really messed up. And that felt so safe than to show up authentically, and expose and not have something I could blame it on. So, yeah, I can relate to your story. And I think a lot of our teenage years, the reason we fall into that is because we need something to blame it on. It's very scary when you have no sense of self to show up in the world 100% without needing a substance to kind of blend into the way we've created our society. It feels safer in the way we've structured things.
Mhm.
So yeah, my relationship with it, I mean, you guys have heard, if you've listened to the first episode, I definitely took the partying to a point where it was pretty bad. I was definitely using that as an escape. And then I had my DUI, which was my big kind of catalyst to my giant spiritual awakening that I've shared. That was a real low point for me, and a point where I actually really had to start looking at the why behind a lot of my actions. But what I had learned was I was actually a codependency addict, and I did a lot of therapy on this. And codependency, a lot of times it's recognized in AA as being like the group you go to if you're with an addict, because it's a good bonding for people that are in relationships with, yeah, people that struggle with substance abuse. So Al-Anon is the meetings that you can go to for codependency. I didn't think I needed that because I was like, I'm not with an addict. Like, I don't think I'm like that extreme. But I read a book once that like hit me right in the gut, that she just talked about her own personal experience with codependency. And I really started seeing that I was using people and other people's problems to escape my own very chronically. So you hear people pleasing, which is kind of a little bit of a precursor for codependency. So you have to be careful. But I was addicted to being around chaos and dealing with people that needed me for stability. And I took so much pride in being the friend that was stable, the friend that could give advice, the friend that was there to, yeah, to support and had it all together. And it was fully fueling my illusion that I was so much better than them. Very subconsciously, not actively, but I definitely looked and reflected back on it later. But I was so entitled to think that I was above the addiction, when really, if I didn't have people around me that were needing me, I was actually experiencing withdrawal symptoms where I, yeah, I felt empty. I felt scared, like silence scared me. I would immediately start calling people if I was too alone, or in too much stillness. I would start having all these behaviors that were coming from a place of really bad addiction to people, like truly people. And yeah, learning and taking it as serious as an addiction to a substance was actually very important for me, because it helped me really recognize the urges to seek other people almost constantly around the clock, because I was so scared of facing me. So,
Mm, that
yeah.
is deep. And what an incredible realization. I mean, that is something that takes a lot of therapy and a lot of healing and a
Yeah.
lot of looking at your shadows to even understand. And this whole process of acknowledging your what you're using to escape is a massive step on your healing journey. It's a big part of spiritual awakening. And
Definitely.
like we've said it before, we'll say it again. It's, the path to spiritual awakening is not all butterflies and rainbows. It's a lot of this kind of work and
Yeah.
holding a mirror up to yourself and trying to realize, like, what are my trauma responses?
Hmm.
What is triggering me? Why am I this way? And we all know those people who create their own drama. It's kind of similar to codependency, but
Yeah.
kind of on the other side.
Victim addiction.
Yep.
You can definitely be addicted to even the attention of having a problem. Like it's attention seeking
Mhm.
behavior,
Yes.
truly. And addiction to attention is really, if you peel that back, it's a deeper need to feel loved and
Mhm.
connected, in a very poor sense of self. That, yeah, you're equating attention to love, basically. And that
Mhm.
is another big problem. If you weren't given maybe the tools younger to know how to self-soothe or nurture, or you weren't really shown a good example of what love looks like,
Mhm.
then attention will feel very close to it. And I think a lot of people get addicted to attention
Mhm.
as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we see this, I feel like it's a telltale thing when there's an absent father, and
Hmm.
growing up, maybe a woman will turn to men to fill this void of attention and love, and seek that love that they were so eagerly needing as a child from a father figure in men in other ways, and not finding that there, and having it kind of snowball into this just toxic relationship with themselves
Hmm.
at the end of the day.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm glad you used the word void too, because that is what it is. It's looking at probably where a lot of the absences were from growing up and reflecting on your childhood. We've brought that up multiple times in different episodes, like looking at what ego identities you've created based on your wounds, looking at the trauma, as Kat said. But it's really looking at where those voids were probably in your life, because you're probably filling those voids with these escapism and
mhm,
addiction type things, because you haven't really faced the pain of what is underneath all of that. And it comes down again to facing some of those emotions, reaching out for help when you need help to even see yourself, or being able to have the support of a community, which is why AA has also been like one of the biggest programs for addiction and
mhm,
alcoholism. And it's beautiful because it has built a sense of community. So I think a lot of the people in Al Anon meetings or AA meetings are also getting what they were craving and why they turned to substances in the first place, which was a deep need to be seen, a deep need to
mhm,
feel held, and a deep need to be able to show your shame and your ugly side and not have it be rejected, which a lot of us will have various stories of where that's happened to us, because maybe the people around us weren't ready to hold space for that kind of thing. But there is always a community that you can plug into where you can get that. And I think that's been, yeah, why those meetings have been so successful on getting people out of addictive patterns.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so part of the struggle of escapism and numbing out is acknowledging when you're in that cycle to begin with.
Yeah.
Because how do you even stop it if you don't know the problem's happening? So I'd love to dig into some signs of escapism so that you can help yourself identify like when this is happening for you. So
Hmm.
Jen, how do you like notice when you're in a pattern or a habit of
Hmm.
trying to numb out?
Yeah. Great segue. Yeah. I think, until I was on this kind of yoga and spiritual journey and really starting to try to be conscious and mindful of why I was doing everything I was doing, which comes in like layers as you continue to go down the path of it. Um, I really, once I was aware that that was I don't want to say better way to live, but the more conscious way to live, the more aligned way to live, I could really start to check myself on when I wasn't doing that. And it would be like, yeah, long periods of, I'm definitely was a TV watcher. Like that's definitely how I even grew up, was a lot of always having the TV on. Um, Definitely going on my phone and checking out. But it's when a bunch of period of time has passed and you like completely lost time, which I do want to say too, can feel so good because life is so tough that it feels really good to lose time sometimes. Like being conscious all the time can be exhausting,
Mhm.
especially in a world that we've structured with so many rules, so many, like, yeah, social norms and obligations. It feels great to check out. But it also, it goes back to that line we've said once before. It's like life living you. Are you living your life? Like it's this balance. But yeah, when I've lost a lot of time and I look up and I'm like, where did the time go of the day? And I know I've just been really mindless in what I've been doing. That's a big thing to recognize for me. And I also use I look at the way I withdraw from stuff. I think it's very important to view like the phone as an addiction because you actually have withdrawal symptoms from being addicted to something. And I think that's important to recognize that when I don't have my phone with me, I actually go through like withdrawal symptoms. Like I get nervous. And when I realized that I had that strong of a tie to my devices, that's when I also started being better at putting boundaries on how much I was using it. What about
Mhm.
you?
Yeah, yeah. I resonate with a lot of that. For me, I can recognize when I'm in a habit of escapism and numbing out when I am moving super fast in my life.
Mm.
I just imagine myself as a little top that spun and
Mhm.
hasn't stopped. And I can recognize this in my sleeping patterns because I will wake up like this is like clockwork every night at 3 a.m. when I'm overstimulated
Mm.
stimulized
Mhm.
throughout the day because there's something too with Ayurveda in that time of day that links with your like mental health. Um, and yeah, so I'll wake up like I actually did this last night because the home buying process has been so crazy.
Cat's moving into a house. It's so cool.
It's wild. So yeah, it's been a lot, and we're under contract, and there's just deadlines happening every day, and all of the what ifs of like, wow, is this actually a good financial commitment, and not actually taking the time to sit with those feelings and just trying to check things off the list. That's a big habit of mine is I go into planner mode because it makes me feel purposeful
Mhm.
and it makes me feel like I'm being productive, and we're taught that those are really important qualities to have.
Mhm.
And so that's how it manifests for me. My lifelong challenge will always be to rest
Yeah.
and to check in with myself. I know this about myself, and whereas other people might go the other way and they're just like they go to states of checking out completely and just like watching TV
Mhm.
nonstop and kind of going into sloth mode. Whereas, I need to do that in order to break this cycle for myself
Yeah.
sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
But this is going to be such a good segue one day into our Enneagram conversation
Oh,
because
yeah.
that so fits your Enneagram archetype too with that wing 3.
Yep.
So good. But yeah, that's you brought up another good point of looking at how you are coping with stress and what your responses are, because that is always going to usually be a precursor before escapism behavior comes on where your threshold is, what you are experiencing, and knowing that when you're in a stressful mode that you probably are going to need a way to regulate yourself down and whatever way that looks like for you. Some it's like more busy work, some it'll be rest, but um that is where you have to be careful, because if you're choosing the same way to respond to stress every time, that's when I think escapism can start to fall into addiction. I think we have to be really careful at continuing to let ourselves be uncomfortable sometimes.
Mhm.
Another thing that popped into my head while you were talking was I try to not use the same stuff to cope with things, because I think that's when it can become a problem. When you have, I think there is like sacredness to rituals and having the same, but if you get too used to being comfortable in the same thing to wind down from, that's when I think it can start to turn habitual, and then it gets really hard to break it.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So I think I think for me, like if I were to say every time I came home from work, then I was going to wind down with TV, then TV is going to be like that precursor of what I want to go to whenever I'm overwhelmed because I've gotten used to it. What I started doing when I was more kind of on the path of trying to be more aware of my habits was trying to choose different things to settle myself down. I like started getting into the mindset, I guess, that I need to practice being uncomfortable sometimes
Mhm.
instead of always going to comfort to feel better, if that
Mhm.
makes some
It
sense.
does.
And so I started like making myself choose different things. Like one day it would be a bath, one day it would be a book, one day it would be going outside. I started trying to make myself, I guess, diversify
Mhm.
my responses to being uncomfortable, which maybe there's no backing behind that. That's just been kind of my own experience. But
I
I
think you're
know the
right.
second I turn to the same thing over and over again, then I start craving that same thing chronically. Like if I were to go to my phone to wind myself down every time, I'm going to start choosing my phone again because our brain is always looking for habits.
Mhm.
It's always looking for, it's always looking for the same. And I think we have to be conscious on, yeah, what we're choosing, why we're choosing it. Could I maybe diversify my responses to things because it lets you be uncomfortable and maybe more curious than habitual and maybe stuck in the same, like the
Yeah.
same responses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So making it's and it all has to do with our neural pathways because like you said, our minds want to go to the easy, quick fix that we know.
Yeah.
And it's like it reminds me of a sugar addiction. It's like you're going to crave more sugar the more sugar you eat.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with numbing out, checking out. You'll just automatically divert to those habits that maybe at first were a really positive thing, and then they just become second nature to the point where it just checks you out and you're less present through it because you're doing it so often and it provides that ease for your
Mm-hmm.
brain.
Yeah, and looking beyond, yeah, I mean, we were just kind of talking more in the physical. You also will have those patterns in how you respond to things. So making sure you're looking at your responses too. If you always respond with anger and you're becoming addictive to that like anger response, or you always respond with like that why me mentality, you can get addicted to that why me mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it really is just like choosing to respond to things differently. I really do think that is an underlying like great principle to get used to is what if I tried on a different pair of shoes and tried to like step into this differently? And I remember getting curious about that at the beginning of my journey. Like, I know what I want to say to this, but what if I tried responding differently? And when you do something differently, it physically almost can hurt your body. Like, you'll feel it because it feels uncomfortable. And uncomfortable is not what like our ego wants.
Yeah.
It wants similarity, but I think in that you really can start to recognize where you're getting stuck and why you're getting stuck is choosing that, yeah, choosing maybe the opposite of what you would normally choose
Mm-hmm.
and like feeling I guess it helps to kind of trigger your shadows, I guess, is
Yeah.
kind of what is happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Getting uncomfortable is stretchy. And when we push our boundaries in that way and kind of force ourselves to do what isn't automatic, that's where real growth happens because that's where you show yourself that, hey, we're going to do something different this time. And you change your habits, you shift your life. And that's where like the big changes happen. It's a culmination of those small baby steps. And yeah, I mean, there's so much to that.
Yeah. And I think the important thing to note if you are working on unwinding from, yeah, an addiction to anything, like underneath that is going to be some pain. It's the shadow that chooses to escape and numb out and check out anyway. So underneath that is going to be a lot of pain surfacing. And so to remember that you don't have to manage that pain by yourself, like find your people, but also know that pain gets a really bad rep for being bad, and it's just not always bad. It hurts, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Facing your pain and facing the underlying emotions can be the most freedom and yeah, the best steps on your journey can be those moments that you're in pain, feeling pain is aliveness. It's aliveness that maybe we don't crave, but it is the opposite of being dead and numb. So remembering to like honor some of the pain that comes up as you start to face some of this stuff, because it's another level of like deeper healing.
Absolutely. And when you don't have those distractions, it's in your face and you're forced to deal with it. It's hard. So
Mhm.
you can set yourself up for success in a number of different ways to make this process easier for you. You can reach out to a friend. Maybe it's the same person, maybe it's your partner, as you're switching up your habits. And, you can even hold each other accountable. You can say you're trying to shift your habit from watching TV automatically when you get home, or even just having it up in the background while you're eating or doing things. Double screening is something that
Mhm.
I get super guilty of, being on my laptop in front of the TV screen, but it is comforting. So sometimes I let myself. But if you want to try to crack that habit, setting yourself up for success could look like having a book that you've been wanting to read right in the place where you'd normally sit down to watch TV. So it's
Mhm.
in your face, and it becomes like a next automatic way where you're kind of thinking about your future self and ways where you won't just kind of sink back into those old habits.
I love helping my future self. It's
Me
like one of
too.
my favorite things to do. I love it. Set yourself up for success. Yeah, great advice. And yeah, find your community. And I seriously, I really do recommend like the Al-Anon meetings. Like, it's really beautiful if you don't have a community. Our Awaken Together family is getting bigger, and it's been so nice to see that too. But tap in with people that can hold that space for you, because it's really scary to unveil all that stuff if you don't have a support system. Because part of the reason some of the addictions might have been started in the first place is because maybe your environment hasn't been a very safe space to expose your authentic self. So, yeah, find your community, really really find your people. I've said it a couple times that that is so significant. And as they say in AA, it's there's a surrendering to kind of a higher power too. And I do think if you put energy towards consciousness, you get a lot more than you're expecting to get. I really do believe in that higher power being there and helping too. And
Mhm.
that is my spiritual side.
Yes, when you put
Yeah.
the intention out there, you're met with everything that will help align you to get there.
Yes.
So,
So go through that little rocky patch, but know like there is a big system that'll help when you have a form of surrendering and
mhm,
trust and you show up and do the work.
yeah,
So,
just ask and you shall receive.
yes. So this was a great talk. We wanted to emphasize, if you have not gone and rated our podcast, we would love to have a rating so that we can continue to build our reviews and build our community. And we have our Awaken Together podcast Instagram page. If you are not on there, we would love to follow.
Yes, thank you so much. And one final reminder that we have just a few spots left on our upcoming Awaken Together retreat in Breckenridge,
So
Colorado.
exciting.
Yeah, we haven't even publicly launched it yet. And just from announcing it here on the podcast, we have 5 spots taken. And we assume that 2 to 4 of those will be taken the next few days. So message us on Instagram again, find us. We love to hear from you and just connect deeper with community. You can also go to catalystliving.com/offerings to check out more information online. But that's all we have for you today. Hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.